The Lost Scrolls, Ep.5, Abraham and the Ancient Covenants. In the heart of Ur, a city of baked brick and ambition, a man named Abram stood alone upon his rooftop, a solitary figure against the geometric might of his culture. Below, the city hummed, a frantic beehive of commerce and ritual, its arteries clogged with the scents of roasted grain, exotic spices, and the metallic tang of sacrificial blood. The great ziggurat, a man-made mountain of defiance, clawed at the heavens, its summit torches spitting sparks against the polished obsidian of the night sky. But Abram's gaze was fixed higher, past the flickering fires of civilization, to the silent, eternal flames scattered across the velvet expanse. He felt the city's pulse, but his own heart beat to a different drum, a slow, deep echo from beyond the veil. A voice, not of wind or thunder, but of profound stillness, began to resonate not in his ears, but in the very marrow of his bones. Look now toward heaven and count the stars if you are able to number them. Abram's breath caught. The stars were not mere lights. They were a script written in fire, a living promise whispered across the void. The voice continued, a current pulling him from the shores of all he knew. Go from your country, your people, and your father's household to the land I will show you. The words were a chisel, chipping away the foundations of his world. Leave Ur, the jewel of the Chaldees, leave the weight of his father Terah's legacy, the familiar cadence of his kin, the very dust that held the memory of his ancestors? A tremor of fear, cold and sharp, pierced the stillness. To walk away from the known was to walk into the arms of madness, to become a ghost in the wilderness. Yet, within the fear, a seed of impossible faith began to germinate, warmed by the light of that celestial promise. He saw them then, not as a lineage of men, but as a river of stars flowing through the desert of time, and he was its source. The decision, once made, settled upon the household like a shroud and a banner all at once. He found Sarai, his wife, a woman whose beauty was as sharp and enduring as the desert wind, her hands weaving thread by lamplight. He spoke the words of the voice, his own voice trembling. She watched him, her eyes holding the shadow of a shared, childless grief and the fire of unwavering loyalty. She saw the ghost of the unseen God in her husband's gaze, and in the space of a single heartbeat, she chose to follow him into the void. Their caravan was a thread pulled from the rich tapestry of Ur, a small, solitary line moving against the grain of the world. As the city gates receded, Abram did not look back. He faced the rising sun, the horizon a blade of raw, golden light, and felt the dust of a new world coat his tongue. The days bled into one another, measured by the slow, relentless crawl of the sun. The desert was a crucible, burning away all that was unnecessary: pride, certainty, the memory of comfort. It was a canvas of brutal simplicity, the ochre of the sand, the cobalt of the sky. At times, the silence was a crushing weight, and the promise felt like a madman's dream. Doubt, a viper, would coil in his heart. But in those moments, he would find an altar, not in hewn stone, but in the stark silhouette of a rock formation against the sunset. He learned prayer not as a recitation of memorized words, but as the silent, desperate beat of his own heart against the ribs of the world, a rhythm of pure trust. They were a specter in the lands of others, a tribe without a nation. In Egypt, a land suffocating in its own golden splendor, the Pharaoh's gaze fell upon Sarai, fear, a venomous serpent, coiled in Abram's gut. Before the throne of this living God, Abram felt the fragility of his life, the thinness of the thread upon which his entire promised future hung. He faltered, naming Sarai as his sister, a half-truth that felt like a whole lie, the words tasting like ash in his mouth. But the hand that guided the stars also moved in the courts of kings. A silent wrongness, a creeping dread, descended upon the palace, and the Pharaoh, trembling before a power he could not comprehend, released them. They fled with wealth they had not sought, but the weight of Abram's shame was a heavier burden to carry. The voice came again, not as a whisper, but as a presence that pressed down upon the very air. Do not be afraid, Abram. I am your shield, your very great reward. On a plain, under the watchful eyes of the mountains, God commanded a ritual, ancient and terrible. Abram took a heifer, a goat, and a ram, and split them down the middle, laying each half opposite the other. A path of blood and flesh was drawn upon the earth. As dusk fell, a deep and dreadful sleep overcame him. The world dissolved into a terrifying darkness, a thick, palpable gloom that seemed to emanate from the heart of creation. He was utterly alone, suspended in a void of pure dread, a witness to a mystery that predated time itself. A smoking firepot, wreathed in shadow, and a blazing torch, a tongue of pure divine fire, materialized in the gloom. They passed between the pieces of the sacrifice, a silent, solemn procession of smoke and light. In that moment, Abram understood. This was not a covenant between equals. God alone was passing through the path of death, taking the curse of the broken vow upon himself. The promise was not sealed by Abram's faithfulness, but by God's. The glory was terrifying, the love incomprehensible. The earth beneath him trembled, and the promise was seared into the fabric of reality itself. Years fell away like sand through a sieve. The promise of a son remained a barren hope. Abram became Abraham, father of many, and Sarai became Sarah, princess. The names felt like a cruel mockery whispered on the desert wind. One sweltering afternoon under the terebinth trees of Mamre, 3 strangers appeared as if from the shimmering heat itself. They were more than men. An aura of the eternal clung to them. They spoke of a son, to be born within the year, their voices calm against the storm of Abraham's disbelief. In the tent, Sarah, her body a testament to 90 years of emptiness, overheard the impossible words. A laugh escaped her lips, not of joy, but of bitter disbelief, the dry, cracking sound of a heart long turned to stone. The divine visitor heard, "Is anything too hard for the Lord?" The question hung in the shimmering heat, a challenge to the tyranny of the possible, echoing in the silent chambers of her womb. And then, against the laws of nature, life bloomed in the desert of Sarah's womb. Isaac was born. His name meant "he laughs." And now, Sarah's laughter was not of bitterness, but of pure, unadulterated wonder. It was the laughter of a dried-up riverbed, suddenly flooded with spring rain, washing away decades of shame and sorrow in its joyous cascade. Abraham held the boy, his heart a symphony of emotions he had never known. This child was not just flesh and blood. He was the promise made tangible, the starlight of that long-ago night in Ur condensed into a single breathing soul. Every cry, every smile, every tiny, grasping finger was a confirmation of God's impossible faithfulness. He was the living embodiment of a covenant sealed in starlight and blood. The voice came again, and this time it was a blade. "Take your son, your only son, whom you love, Isaac, and go to the region of Moriah. Sacrifice him there." Each word was a hammer blow against Abraham's soul. The world went silent. The sky turned to iron. There was no room for argument, no space for bargaining. There was only the cold, stark horror of the command, and the crushing weight of a faith that demanded everything. He rose before dawn, the air cold and thin, and saddled his donkey. He did not wake Sarah. Some griefs are too heavy for 2 hearts to carry. The journey was 3 days of agonizing silence. Isaac walked beside him, his youthful chatter, a stark contrast to the storm raging within his father's heart. "Father?" the boy's voice chirped. "Yes, my son?" Abraham's voice was gravel. "The fire and wood are here," Isaac said, his eyes wide with innocent curiosity. "But where is the lamb for the burnt offering?" The question pierced Abraham deeper than any knife. He looked at his son, the promise of the stars shining in his eyes, and the words came from a place beyond his own strength. "God himself will provide the lamb, my son." On the summit, the world felt raw and exposed. With trembling hands, Abraham built an altar. Each rock felt like a condemnation. He arranged the wood, his mind a whirlwind of memory. Isaac's first steps, his laughter, the warmth of his small hand. He turned to the boy, and for a moment, his resolve shattered. He saw the trust in his son's eyes, and it was an agony beyond imagining. He bound Isaac the ropes, a serpent around his own heart, and laid him upon the wood. The promise was now on the altar, ready for the fire. He reached for the knife. The flint blade, cold and impersonal, felt heavy as a mountain. The sun glinted off its edge, a sliver of cruel light. He raised his arm. The sky held its breath. The wind died. In that suspended moment, Abraham surrendered everything: his love, his future, his understanding, his very self. He relinquished the promise, back to the one who had given it. His entire being was a single, silent scream of trust. The knife began its descent. "Abraham, Abraham!" A voice, like the crack of thunder, shattered the silence. It was the angel of the Lord, a cry from the heavens that stopped his arm in mid-air. The knife froze. "Do not lay a hand on the boy," the voice commanded. "Now I know that you fear God, because you have not withheld from me your son, your only son." The strength fled from Abraham's limbs. The knife clattered onto the rocks. He collapsed, his body racked with sobs, clutching his son who was still bound upon the altar, the terror receding like a black tide. Abraham looked up, his vision blurred with tears, and saw it. A ram, its horns caught fast in a thicket of thorns. It was a substitute, a provision, the lamb that God himself had provided. With newfound strength, he unbound his son, holding him in an embrace that spoke of death and resurrection. He took the ram and offered it in Isaac's place. The smoke from the altar ascended not as a scent of tragedy, but as a fragrance of faith tested and found true. The angel's voice thundered from the heavens once more, not with a command, but with an oath. "I swear by myself, declares the Lord, that because you have done this, I will surely bless you and make your descendants as numerous as the stars in the sky and as the sand on the seashore." The promise of was now an unbreakable oath, sealed not just by fire and smoke, but by the blood of a willing heart. The covenant was complete, forged in the fires of ultimate trial. The journey down the mountain was different. The silence was no longer heavy with dread, but filled with a quiet, profound peace. The world seemed newborn, every rock and thorn bush imbued with a sacred light. Abraham walked beside his son, not just as a father, but as the first in a long line, a patriarch whose faith had become the bedrock of a nation yet to be born. He had walked to the very edge of oblivion and had found God waiting for him there. Abraham's faith was a seed planted on a lonely mountain, destined to grow into a tree whose branches would reach across the centuries. The smoke from the ram on Mount Moriah ascended into the heavens, a whisper of another sacrifice on another hill, far in the future. The ram caught in the thorns was a placeholder, a symbol of a greater lamb who would one day be offered. Abraham's trial was a glimpse into the heart of God himself, the story of a father willing to sacrifice his only son, sealing a new and everlasting covenant in blood and love. The scrolls fall silent here, their edges frayed by the passage of ages, but the echo of Abraham's faith remains, a celestial music resonating in the soul of humanity. It is a call to leave our own to walk by faith and not by sight, to trust the promise even when the knife is in our hand. For in the place of ultimate surrender, we find the heart of God and the ram caught in the thorns.